41% of the planet's surface is already claimed by arid deserts. Another 40% stands dangerously on the verge of being swallowed by the relentless sand. At a critical time when the Earth is losing its last green spaces, China has become the center of one of the boldest ecological resurrections of the century. One can notice how the landscape changes where the restoration efforts begin, halting the advancing dunes. But the global context remains grim. While the rest of the world struggles to find answers, one man has forged a completely different path entirely on his own. In just 30 years, he has planted more than 200 million willow trees to bind the loose soil. 196,000 solar panels now rise above the dunes as a national symbol of technological adaptation. The dark photovoltaic cells form a geometric ocean against the beige sand. But this is just the beginning. The ecosystem required living inhabitants to fully function. How could a rabbit possibly save an entire barren desert? At first glance, adding herbivores to a fragile environment seems like a mistake. But in reality, it was a calculated step to restore the biological chain. 1,200,000 rabbits were released into this sea of sand to jumpstart the natural cycle. The mystery behind this extraordinary green resurrection is now ready to be revealed. Minus 20 degrees Celsius is the freezing threshold reached by knife-sharp winds in one of the harshest regions of China. The Kubuqi Desert is known for winters that cut to the bone, while summers turn the landscape into a scorching furnace, burning the ground beneath. At first glance, this territory seems like an eternal wasteland, but in reality, the barren desert seen today hides a different past. It was once a prosperous agricultural land filled with villages, flowing rivers, and vast grasslands capable of sustaining entire communities. Then everything changed as the winds grew stronger and the lush grass disappeared. One can notice how the sand began to move relentlessly, swallowing houses and burying roads under shifting drifts. Desertification happened with terrifying speed. The remaining residents were forced to leave their homes one by one, retreating before the encroaching dunes. But this is just the beginning of the scale of the problem. Why is this transformation considered a national catastrophe? The data paints a grim picture of environmental collapse. According to 2025 reports, about 27.4% of China's land area has experienced desertification. This area is equivalent to nearly 4 times the size of the United States state of Texas. The consequences include not only the total collapse of biodiversity, but also increasingly frequent sandstorms. These storms severely erode the fertile topsoil, making natural recultivation almost impossible. It is visible how the landscape degrades into a lifeless expanse. If you cannot yet envision the scale of destruction, that is roughly 20 million tons of agricultural produce lost every year to the sea of sand. In this context, in just a few decades, the Kubuqi Desert expanded more than 25 miles eastward. The moving sands buried thousands of acres of farmland under dunes reaching up to 200 feet high. This expansion solidified it into China's 7th largest desert, with an area of more than 7,200 square miles. It does not end at this stage of devastation. So how did a nation once swallowed by the desert to the brink of despair not only halt this catastrophe, but rise to become the greatest strategic rival to the United States? 400 million residents living in the semi-arid regions of northern and northwestern China faced a direct threat to their livelihoods from the advancing sands. As early as the 1950s and 1960s, the state launched one of the largest anti-desertification campaigns in history to stop this geological shift. Workers planted windbreak forests, restricted livestock grazing, and drilled numerous deep wells through layers of dusty soil. Yet, despite massive effort and resources, the results were almost zero. But this is just the beginning of the struggle. The desert kept advancing. But China would not be China if it could not eventually find an intelligent solution to such a critical problem. Why did the turning point begin with a poor teacher named Wang Wenbiang? At first glance, he seemed to lack the resources to become the Desert King. The answer lies in his humble origins in Inner Mongolia, where he possessed neither wealth nor privilege. One can notice how the wind became a physical enemy, as he cycled more than 6 miles across sand every day to reach his classroom. There were days when the gale was so strong that his bicycle was buried halfway in sand, while grains whipped into his face and straight into his lungs. It was in those harsh conditions that he made a bold vow to make the desert pay rent if he could not escape it. And the incredible thing is, he actually did. It gets more complex further on. In 1988, owning only a small salt company, Wang Wenbiang decided to attempt what no one else dared to do. People called him crazy and authorities saw him as a dreamer, but in reality, his plan to turn sand into living soil was calculated with precision. He poured all his savings and even borrowed more to pursue this ambition, choosing to live right in the desert. There, he patiently observed the tiniest changes in the soil, measuring every drop of moisture. Consequently, he spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build windbreak walls and plant more than 60 million willow trees. One can see how these efforts greened 1,000 square miles of previously barren land, stabilizing the shifting dunes. But the true breakthrough came when he devised a strategy no one had ever tried before, bringing rabbits into the ecosystem. Everything only gets more complicated. Today, more than 1,200,000 Rex rabbits live in areas once swallowed by sand. This French hybrid breed is considered the white gold of the fur industry because its fur is soft as velvet and sleek as otter skin. It possesses no coarse hairs, and each pelt can sell for up to $30 on the market. A female rabbit can produce 25 litters a year, yielding 200 to 300 offspring. These animals endure cold down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. They consume very little water, making them perfect for the harsh environment of Kubuqi. 300 feet is the depth to which willow roots must extend to find water in the arid desert. Wang realized that to raise rabbits here, he first had to create shade and a sustainable food source. Why are willow trees the specific key to this transformation? The desert environment is hostile and unforgiving to any biological life. These trees possess the unique ability to draw deep groundwater, holding the shifting sand in place and creating a cooler microclimate necessary for survival. Workers first identify locations with the highest potential to retain moisture in the burning terrain. One can notice how they dig deep pits so the roots can reach damp soil beneath the surface. Temporary fences of wire mesh and reed rise around the excavations. This barrier reduces wind strength and keeps sand from filling the pits back in within hours. At first glance, planting trees in scorching sand and raging dust storms seems like a futile task. But in reality, it requires extraordinary faith and precise engineering. Long willow saplings, treated with a moisture-retaining solution, are planted straight into the ground. Workers secure them with heavy stakes to prevent strong winds from uprooting the young trees. In the first weeks, each willow is shielded with a sunshade. Drip irrigation provides just enough water to encourage the roots to drill deeper underground. But this is just the beginning. Only once the willows stabilize the microclimate does Wang introduce the second critical component, the Rex rabbits. These animals are never released into the wild, but are raised in enclosed ecological farms. Their meat becomes food, their fur turns into clothing, and their organs serve as medicine. It gets more complex further on. Therefore, the most important output for the ecosystem is their manure. Rabbit waste contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, nutrients the desert sand completely lacks. one can see how the organic matter transforms sterile sand into moist, nutrient-rich humus when dropped onto the ground. Remarkably, Rex rabbits cannot digest grass seeds. They unintentionally sow these seeds along with natural fertilizer packets, accelerating vegetation growth. The camera glides over the landscape where an ecological loop emerges. Willows feed rabbits, rabbits feed the soil, and the soil feeds the willows. Each acre of land produces more than 5 tons of humus per year. Within just 3 to 5 years, golden sand turns into fertile soil. Thanks to this model, more than 200 million willow trees have been planted. This massive green wall reduces wind speed by up to 90%, blocking 15 million tons of sand each year. 15 million tons of sand are effectively blocked every single year by the new ecological barriers, reducing local sand transmission by up to 90%. As the ecosystem began to recover, the region rapidly transformed into a massive ecological economic laboratory. The first phase involved a direct battle against the sand. Dozens of bulldozers and several hundred workers operated almost around the clock to level the terrain. Why was such mechanical intervention necessary before planting? It would seem easier to simply scatter seeds across the dunes. But without mechanically leveling the terrain and constructing windbreak barriers, the shifting sands would bury any vegetation before it could take root. One can notice how the chaotic dunes gave way to stabilized fields within just a few years. Approximately 700 to 800 square miles of desert had been greened, laying the foundation for further development. At first glance, the next stage involving the Rex rabbit farming model seems risky for a fragile ecosystem, but in reality, it revived the soil. Around 1,200,000 rabbits were introduced. They generated more than 100 million yuan in economic value each year, providing stable livelihoods for thousands of households in areas once swallowed by sand. Workers expanded the ambition by building the Junma solar power plant with 196,000 panels. The units are arranged in the shape of a giant galloping horse, the world's largest energy artwork certified by Guinness. The camera glides along the structure, revealing how panels create shade and reduce wind speed by up to 50%. This helps grass regrow and turns rabbits, sheep, and geese into biological lawnmowers that keep the soil stable. Transition to the next level. Because of this massive infrastructure, the plant generates about 1.15 billion kilowatt hours of electricity per year. This output is enough to supply more than 200,000 people. Therefore, for more than a decade, Kubuqi proved that ecological economics can become a true engine of development. From the year 2010 to 2020, the model generated 10 billion United States dollars. This made it the most profitable green model in Asia. By 2022, the project had saved 760,000 tons of coal and reduced 1.85 million tons of carbon dioxide. In just 4 years, it transformed 2,600 acres of the Dead Sea into a thriving energy oasis. Then, the unimaginable happened. After decades of human struggle against sand, nature finally responded. A 2023 report from China's Ministry of Ecology stunned the world. And this is not the limit. Populations of wild deer, desert foxes, and migratory birds in Kubuqi had increased fourfold compared to the year 1990. Species once vanished reappeared. Drilling reveals that groundwater, often called Kubuqi's liquid gold, rose by an average of 5 to 6.5 feet over 20 years. It means that if you drill a well today, you only need to drill half the depth your grandparents did. That difference marks the boundary between dead land and living land. Not only animals, but more than 100 native plant species, such as feathergrass, desert poplar, and various desert flowers, returned. It creates an almost unbelievable sight where golden sand is interwoven with green grass. Even patches of small shimmering forests are visible under the sunlight. However, the journey has not been without controversy. Some experts argue that the role of rabbits has been exaggerated and that most of the success stems from state planning and massive investment. In addition, several pilot zones have reported nitrogen pollution or the appearance of green algae, raising questions about the long-term sustainability of the entire model. 4,000 miles separates the controlled ecological zones of China from the arid landscapes of Australia. In the 19th century, settlers brought exactly 24 rabbits to the southern continent for recreational hunting. At first glance, such a small group seems harmless, but in reality, it triggered one of the most devastating biological invasions in history. But this is just the beginning of the crisis. The population exploded to more than 1 billion individuals within just 50 years. One can notice how the ravenous swarms strip vast grasslands bare, destroying the deep roots of trees. Nearly 2/3 of the Australian plains turned into lifeless, desert-like wastelands under the relentless pressure of the invasive species. The ecosystem collapsed as the greenery vanished. Why did rabbits become uncontrollable monsters in Australia while serving as saviors in China? The government attempted extreme measures, utilizing explosives and releasing viruses to stop the spread. The answer lies strictly in the method of human management and industrial containment. Authorities even constructed a fence stretching 2,000 miles, yet the animals breached every barrier. Transition to the next level of strategy. In Kubuqi, the Rex rabbits were never released into the open wild. They functioned as part of a tightly managed, closed ecological chain. It is visible how the animals consume willow leaves in their enclosures, producing organic fertilizer to restore the depleted soil. This generates economic value while simultaneously revitalizing the land. China was not simply raising livestock, but building a strategic ecosystem in which the rabbit is just one precisely calculated link in the entire soil recovery cycle. 2011 is the year the United Nations recognized the Kubuqi project as a global model for land restoration. Why did this initiative gain such prestige despite lingering controversies? To the skeptical eye, the data might initially seem mixed or incomplete. However, the results were convincing enough to designate the site as an international demonstration center in 2019. One can notice how the success of the soil recovery cycle validated the effort. Wang's story quickly extended its influence far beyond China's borders. At first glance, this ecological economic model seems limited to Asia, but in reality, it has spread to Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. Many nations there are currently struggling with the accelerating effects of desertification and climate change. It is visible how the methodology adapts to different arid zones. Observation of Andalusia, Spain, the largest semi-arid region in Europe, reveals the scale of the transformation. The government has begun adopting the Kubuqi-style approach, building a Mediterranean green wall to halt erosion. But this is just the beginning. The landscape gradually changes as they implement regenerative agriculture and construct agro-PV solar farms to harvest energy. Since a desert in China can be revived, the question remains of what stops the rest of the world. Thus, dead land transforms into a symbol of hope